This is an unmasking of the entire edifice of the morally bankrupt license fee model and the broadcaster that sits in front of it. We need to start with the crime itself. They didn't just get caught with a mistake, did they? They got caught out entirely. They were so blinded by their own Trump derangement syndrome that they resorted to Richard Madeley, of all people, calling them lousy, bent, dishonest journalism. Before I play that clip, the same people that edited, by the way, the Panorama program in which that Trump clip selectively clipped together to make it look like he was inciting violence, have approached me, have approached other people in Reform to produce a documentary on the rise of Reform UK. We have pulled out of that documentary from the BBC. We will not work with people that, quite frankly, call journalism. They ain't journalists, they're activists. This was activism. This was an act of complete and utter deception, fraud, and activism. It is not journalism, and Reform UK will not have any participation in such a totally corruptible production company working alongside the BBC. But don't take my word for it, right? Watch the moment when the liberal mindset was actually exposed live on Good Morning Britain, and Kevin Maguire of the Daily Mirror sort of floundered like a fish out of water, trying to actually come up with a retort to the challenge by Richard Madeley.
Now, I am no defender of Trump, but I'm no defender of lousy, bent journalism either. And I'm sorry, that Panorama documentary was lousy, bent, dishonest journalism. And we should all be ashamed of it.
Trump was a defender of the Proud Boys and white supremacists.
You're ignoring the facts, Kevin.
You were taking, right? You were taking a 12 to 15 second clip in a full programme, programme that was broadcast a year ago, and I'm not aware of any big public complaints about it.
No, because it played
3.5 years previously, and ignoring all the other evidence.
The reason that there were no complaints...
They should not.
The reason there were no complaints about that edit were because people didn't spot it. And the reason they didn't spot it was because we all, mostly, think that Trump did incite violence on Capitol Hill. So to see that edit simply confirmed our prejudice.
We're talking about an error of judgment. I mean,
Massive.
you call it a lie. And I would say they were doing it probably for dramatic effect, and they shouldn't have done it.
Yeah. Look, Richard Madeley there, Trump did not incite violence on January 6th. But Richard Madeley is right that they had the narrative in their head, their liberal lefty bias that guides the BBC. That is their raison d'etre. That actually, the fact of the matter is, they knew what they wanted to portray to the British public, and they signed, sealed, and delivered a selection of selective clips that painted that to their public. And anyone watching it would have come away with the view that actually Trump did incite violence. But Madeley's reply, the reason there were no complaints is because people didn't spot it, because we all mostly think that Trump did incite violence. To see that edit simply confirms prejudice. So while I disagree with him on Trump inciting violence, I agree with him on confirming their own prejudice, their own biases. Bingo, right? That is what it's all about. This is the definition of institutional bias. Their own liberal prejudice is so very ingrained within the psyche of the BBC that they didn't even see the lie. It just feels all so true to them. This is what they believe. So the cover-up was the story, right? But it gets worse because this wasn't just a one-off error. It was a cover-up. They knew about it for a year. And when you get caught, you're supposed to apologise. And even the Labour Prime Minister, who called Gillian Duffy a bigoted woman back in 2010, useless man that he was, has actually, well, I'm afraid, agreed with everything that I just said. Everything that I just said. Gordon Brown, even a broken clock, my friends, is right twice a day.
I think the problem that the BBC has had is this happened a year ago. and an apology should have been made instantly. If a mistake has been made, you've got to apologise instantly. And then I don't think Tim Davie or the head of news would have had to resign, because they would have corrected the mistake immediately. It went unreported, unacknowledged, unapologised for, and I think that is where trust becomes an issue.
So an apology should have been made instantly, and he's right there. It went unapologised for. This is when trust dies, because the cover-up in action played out in full force. And you only have to watch the liberal left media in their hysteria. The former BBC cover girl Emily Maitlis on the so-called news agents, more like the propaganda agents, actually came out and said that the likes of me, the likes of Gordon Brown, the likes of Richard Madeley are all wrong, and that there isn't an institutional bias against Trump on the Beeb.
My point is that when Michael Prescott, who is the external advisor who had been advising the BBC on impartiality, wrote his dossier, which we now know was leaked to the Daily Telegraph, and in it he said the programme materially misled viewers, I think you have to step back. I think you have to really step back. And actually, I've read that dossier in full now, and it is not very obvious that he is an independent, impartial advisor.
You know, for 4 years, I covered the Trump first term as the BBC's North America.
Because he told the truth.
Our guiding light was be very careful and then be very bold. So when you've got firm judgments to make them, but do them on the most solid of foundations. You do not edit two different clips together. Now, why didn't the BBC apologise last week for it? And that's the fascinating bit of politics that's gone on here. There is a benign explanation that Samir Shah, the chairman, felt his first duty was to write to the DCMS chair, which seems to me if that's true, what a miscalculation. It was obvious that Trump was going to seize on it, and Caroline Levitt, the White House spokesperson, would leap on it, and sure enough, they have. The more sinister explanation, and this is, I think, gets to the heart of where the BBC is now, is that this was a battle between those on the board who wanted more than just an apology, a whoopsie-daisy, that was a bad edit, but who wanted a sort of surrender document. They wanted to say, we've made a mistake here, and we do have a problem with impartiality in the BBC structurally. And that is something that BBC news bosses absolutely flatly reject, including Deborah Tenness this morning when she was walking into the building for perhaps her last time.
I feel like I've been living in a parallel universe.
Oh, God, gets worse. Gets worse.
The hysteria over this story, whipped up by commercial organisations, newspapers, MAGA, the rest of it, the sort of hard-right online ecosystem that we talk about all the time, all that have an agenda, is something to behold. That edit in question, John, you're right, it was a mistake. It was clearly misjudged, but the idea that it is an example of institutional bias against Trump is absurd.
It's not absurd at all. What an unbelievable clip, right? In one breath, they admit the external independent audit that took place that said the BBC materially misled its viewers. They admit that there was an internal battle because BBC bosses wanted to ignore the structural problem with impartiality, but they blame the hard right. They blame MAGA. The board has pointed out the blatant systemic bias within the BBC. And in the same breath, this harem of hysterical lefty commentators dismiss the whole thing as our hysteria. As our hysteria. They say that the idea of institutional bias is absurd. So they admit to the cover-up. And then they say that it's the hard right that are calling for the BBC to apologise. I've just showed you Gordon Brown said it. I've just showed you Richard Madeley said it. They accuse us of getting hysterical for noticing, right? That's our crime. The arrogance of these people is just staggering. That clip was edited to try and suggest and convince us plebs that Orange Man bad, right? Because that is their worldview. They want us to believe and swallow the propaganda that the BBC puts out, and it uses the hard-earned incomes of single mothers, of pensioners, of those who are knocked on the doors of who happen to be home if they are single mothers, and they get hauled in court to pay for Gary Lineker's news, to pay for this Trump propaganda, to pay for all of these things that actually I think are a moral outrage in 2025. And the Labour Party came out yesterday and they said they are committed to the BBC's licence fee. I mean, it's absurd. They were caught red-handed. Did they all resign in shame? No. They then came out and attacked the man who caught them. They're now blaming a Tory on the board. They found one Tory on the sodden board of the BBC, Robbie Gibb, who used to be in number 10 Downing Street advising the Prime Minister. If memory serves, it was Theresa May, who actually did his job, if the reports are correct, and demanded accountability. He demanded that the BBC actually holds its hands up to the biases that it holds. Now, the BBC mafia have come out and said that actually this makes you a traitor to the cause. Listen to this clip in Parliament. It truly is, by the way, under this Labour Party, a parliament of pygmies.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Robbie Gibb, faithful or traitor?
Secretary of State. Perhaps the honourable lady and I can hear her views about that over a few drinks later on.
So that's obviously a play on the BBC's Traitors programme, which I've never watched, by the way, but I know what it is. Now, the traitor demanding the truth here in this scenario, Robbie Gibb, who's been smeared by these people, it is because it's a cult, and the excuses from their mates in the media are utterly pathetic. This is a former BBC presenter. So Sangeeta Miska, she says, if the BBC was a hotbed of left-wing wokery producing systemically biased coverage, Jeremy Corbyn may well have been elected Prime Minister in 2019. It's not. He wasn't, and we got Boris Johnson instead. No, love, nobody watches the bloody BBC news anymore, do they? If the BBC, what a joke, that's their brilliant defence, is it? They cannot see the bloody wood for the trees, because they are... This is bias. This is cultural bias. It's in the water. It's in their blood. It's in their DNA. It's in everything they do. It isn't about Trump. It's systemic. This is the most important point, right? It's not about Trump. It's about their entire woke activist agenda. While they've been busy throwing women under the bus, their own staff have been screaming at them to stop and actually look. So the BBC reported that actually I'll just get that up for you. The Beeb, right? So in parts of this tranche of the dossier showing their systemic biases, there is one article that comes from the Telegraph, and they expose parts of the story in which they ignored the pro-trans bias that's evident in the BBC Sports. Now, I'll show you this. So this person here is Leah Thomas, who went viral for being a swimmer that won medals against women, right? Obviously being biologically male and stronger than the women who were competing against them. And apparently, female staff at the BBC were warning them for 5 years that they're pushing uncritical and celebratory puff pieces on biological men and women's sports. And what happened, according to this dossier? Well, they were ignored. They were unable to voice their opinions. They were fearful. This isn't a newsroom. This is a captured institution. It was quite literally stonewalled. And I mean that in the metaphorical and literal sense, because they had Stonewall advising them, run by a cabal of ideological activists who silence their own staff. But my friends, this is all coming to a beautiful reckoning. The man they tried to frame, none other than the 45th and 47th President of the United States of America, they tried to frame him, and he's about to own the building, right? He's a man who's quite familiar with real estate. And listen to what he had to say for himself on Fox News. He had a sit down with Fox News, and it shows you how global this story has gone, actually, because for the president of the free world to actually be asked about the BBC on national telly within the US is quite the story in and of itself.
Are you going ahead and suing the BBC?
Well, I guess I have to. You know, why not? Because they defrauded the public, and they've admitted it, and their top echelon.
Director General and the CEO
This is
both
within
resigned.
one of our great allies. You know, this is our supposedly our great ally, BBC. The government has a chunk of that one, I guess, but that's a pretty sad event. They actually changed my January 6th speech, which was a beautiful speech, which was a very calming speech, and they made it sound radical. And they actually changed it. What they did was rather incredible. They're showing me the results later on, the results of what they did, how they butchered it up. But it was very dishonest, and the head man quit, and a lot of the other people quit.
Yeah, so there you are. He's going for it. £1 billion. And the best part of this whole glorious mess is, well, it shows that there is a route to Trump being able to sue. And I say that I'm conflicted on this, actually, because I just mentioned the moral bankruptcy at the heart of the BBC's funding model, the licence fee, because it does target single parents. There are mothers who are targeted by the BBC because they happen to be at home when the TV licensing authority shows up at the door and asks why they haven't paid their penneth to the Beeb. Well, the BBC chairman, Samir Shah, has publicly admitted that the edit of Trump was wrong and did give the impression of a direct call for violent action, i.e. they suggested that Trump incited violence. They've handed Trump the loaded gun, and Trump is going to use it. Trump's lawyers, they just need to send an email. The BBC will be forced to use British licence fee money to pay for a settlement to the United States president for their own bent, dishonest journalism. And to top it all off with the sheer pathological irony, the Beeb, which Alison Pearson writes about this morning, while the BBC was in the middle of this scandal about bent editing, they actually dishonestly edited Kemi Badenoch's quote about their editing. I know, it's very meta. You could not make it up. They're crying about a right-wing coup while their lefty mates sneer at GB News. Have a look at this one. They're taking what Kemi said out of context as well. It's quite extraordinary. I think Kemi Badenoch and the Conservative Party are dead and useless, but still, it shows how their bias works, right? But there was an attack on GB News by a Labour MP. He said, if you tune in tonight to Farage and GB News, Nigel Farage will bring you the latest headlines. He doesn't actually. There's a newsreader that brings you the headlines, as is regulated by Ofcom and required by Ofcom. Yes, he's on his very show. Nigel Farage can offer you his unique insights on Nigel Farage. But Jack pointed out on X, we're not forced to pay for GB News. I hope this helps. Exactly, that's the point. Luke Charters is more like Luke Charlatan. One is a choice. The other is a compulsory state broadcasting racket. I know what I'm getting when I watch Nigel Farage on GB News. I do not know what I'm getting when I watch a manufactured, bent, so-called journalistic puff piece on the Beeb. One is a state broadcasting racket that just got caught committing fraud. The other is a fledgling, young, new market entrant that is offering the people of this country a voice. The BBC's fall from grace isn't a tragedy. To me, it's a long overdue public service. I do not wish them well, and Donald J. Trump will have to watch how this baby plays out.